Gentlemen, welcome to our Proclaiming Justice Today program. We're delighted to have you. And today we're going to focus on the textbooks. Our audience is aware of the battle that Proclaiming Justice to the Nations has been fighting to expose these textbooks in communities across the country. And so we've invited you here today to talk about this issue. You two have been at the forefront of fighting this battle. So if you would be so kind to introduce yourself to our audience, tell us your name and also the name of the organization, and why did you get involved in this? Bill, Dr. Saxton, we'll start with you.
Well, I am William A. Saxton. I am chairman of Citizens for National Security, and I started the organization about 10 or 11 years ago now, and our purpose was to create information having to do with radical Islam, other extremist ideologies, and rogue nations, and to make that available to the federal government, to law enforcement, and to the general public. In about 2009, we discovered that there was a form of jihad being waged against the West, this country in particular, which actually transcended the blowing up buildings and beheading people, but rather was a cultural jihad, one in which textbooks were used as a vehicle for getting to the hearts and minds of young people in the K-12 public schools.
Very good. Gary, Dr. Gary Numan, great to have you on the program today. Tell us about yourself. How did you get involved in this?
I got involved just by chance, actually. Bill, Dr. Saxton, is a patient of mine, and it was more interesting to talk about politics and cultural jihad when he was starting his organization, and he asked me to get involved, and I was very interested. But I had a moment in my life where everything came together for this cultural jihad, the textbook problem. I was speaking with my daughter in 2005, and at that time Israel was removing their own settlers from Gaza. They had given up Gaza, they left. And it was very ugly, and my daughter, who had never shown an interest in really political Israel or anything like that, she said to me, "Dad, isn't it terrible what's going on in Israel right now?" And I said, "Yes, sweetheart, it is." And she said, "You know, there would be peace if the Israelis would just give the Palestinians back their land." So all of a sudden, after being extremely well educated, learning from the textbooks in this country, I was hit in the face with the fact that my child could learn this and conclude that the Palestinians were entitled to land in Israel. Where did she learn this? And what's worse was I paid for her education, of course, you know. So it became personal, and when Bill introduced me to Citizens for National Security, it just seemed a perfect fit, and I became involved.
Very good. Yes, it is shocking to see the content. We came across, as you well know, a quote in a textbook published by Pearson Publishers that legitimized Palestinians blowing themselves up in a Jerusalem restaurant because they were waging a war against Israeli government policies and army actions. And of course, when one of the parents of a student in the class, this is a high school, this is not a professor in a university, this is a high school history teacher. When this student came home from school and questioned who had legitimate rights to the land of Israel, coming from a Christian family, an evangelical Christian family, the parent was irate. And of course, that's when I got called into researching the textbooks. And of course, we came across your organization and found CFNS a very reliable source of information for us as we were embarking on this endeavor to look, because we thought this was only in Williamson County. Dr. Saxton, tell us about how far-reaching are these textbooks, and what have you found in the content of the textbooks in your research?
Well, I think it would be, as a precursor to getting to the nub of that question, I think it's significant to tell you how I actually found the textbook issue myself. It was, again, somewhat by accident. I had been, for the better part of my career, involved in the intelligence community, And the approach we were taking, of course, was to try to sniff out all of the potential threats to this category from jihad, other than a cultural, a soft jihad, but rather from a terrorism point of view. And one day, my wife pointed out a textbook that was being used by one of our grandchildren. And she was astounded by what she had read, and she brought it to my attention, and I was similarly astounded when I realized the kind of propaganda that was being put in these textbooks. I didn't know the extent of it at that moment, but then I began to look into it. And what I found was a purposeful attempt by an organization known as the Council on Islamic Education, a spin-off of the Muslim Brotherhood, whose purpose was to propagandize and to proliferate a radical Islam slant to the language being taught in history and geography textbooks. So we began a research at that time initially to see what the situation was in Florida, which was at that time the base and headquarters of our organization, Citizens for National Security. And the more I got into it and the more I began to look at all the textbooks, I realized that the Council on Islamic Education was doing a very good job. You mentioned Pearson, for example. Pearson, which is probably the largest, the most significant publisher of K-12 textbooks. They have like about 70 to 80% of the market in this country. Had on the academic review board of their flagship world history textbook the founder of Council on Islamic Education and one of his associates. His name was Shabir Mansouri, and his associate was Susan Douglas. And by the way, once we really got into this, they decided to change the name of their organization, which they frequently do, same people, same players, but they then began to call it the Institute on Religion and Civic Values, which is a very nice, benign-sounding name for basically a terrorist-based organization, the terror in this case being the classrooms and the books that they would put into the classrooms. Well, from then on, we undertook an intensive research program, and we found literally hundreds of Islam-biased content in the textbooks. It was not only Islam-biased, but it was demeaning to Christianity and Judaism, and it was flagrant. I mean, I had no idea that this form of jihad, with all of my background in this business, that form of jihad was taking place. And the more information we collected and made available, we published documents, we put them on our website, they began to get picked up and they began to get some attention. But we realized we had a really, really big problem. I'd also like to point out that these people who were doing this, the IRCV and its predecessor, CIE, they learned very well the lessons that were taught to them by early 1930s Germany, where Hitler and Goebbels, the propaganda expert, realized that if you can get to the hearts and minds of kids, then you can control everything. In fact, Hitler even said that. Let me control the textbooks, he said, and I will control the state. And Goebbels implemented that philosophy. These kids in the Hitler Youth movement were actually so brainwashed that after a while they were turning in their own parents. And it dawned on me at that point, what would happen if a similar phenomenon took place in our society? So then we really revved it up and moved forward to the point where today we can show these statements and these flaws, make them available to the general public, and more organizations like yours, who've done outstanding work in this area as well, can pick it up, and we become, through force multiplication, the purveyor of fair and balanced information on the history and geography of our country.
Right. So, to be clear, your background wasn't in education. It was in national security issues, CIA. What other national security agencies did you work with?
Well, that's something I really would not like to discuss.
Oh, okay. I totally understand. It's still secret.
Some people have no problem with it, but I don't make I don't like to broadcast what I did.
Well, no, absolutely not. I completely understand. But you come back, yeah. I know, you're just a dentist, right? I'm just the dentist.
That's all.
But the point that I want to make is this wasn't your background. You were fighting, you were addressing national security issues. You saw your granddaughter's textbook and you saw the threat that that textbook posed for our children.
In 1993, which was the first World Trade Center bombing, we saw what the issues would be and how terrorism could take hold in a very physical sense. Since that time, we became somewhat more adept at least until 9/11, of stopping that type of terrorism. But the terrorism that was taking place in the classrooms, we had no idea that that was going on. Long before even I got into this thing, these groups, Council on Islamic Education, etc., were doing their job, and we had no idea what was happening. It was pure accident that I got into it.
Bill is certainly right. We didn't know. And the reason we didn't know was because we weren't listening. As far back as 1996, a very well-educated California professor named was William Bonetta studied 18 or 20 California textbooks. And he came out, the results of his study just in California, is 1996, you know, when bin Laden was issuing his fatwa, you know, said that the textbooks being used now just in California were full of propaganda, it was intentional, and the goal was to convert students to Islam. And those are his words. In 2008, I believe, another gentleman named Sewell, Gilbert Sewell, another eminent professor and market researcher, did a national study, and he found basically the same thing. So this is not a California problem or a New York problem or Florida. It is a national problem, and there are studies available to tell us what was happening, and we weren't listening. And the way that the CIE or the IRCV, the way they gain their success is because they're under the radar. And the reason that the CIE became the IRCV was because they were getting some headlines. People were beginning to notice. Same people, same organization, same goal. Shabir Mansouri, his goal, according to him, was to create a bloodless revolution in America's classrooms. His words. Susan Douglas, that Bill referenced, she is an American convert to Islam and goes around the country lecturing, telling people that the terrorists don't really mean it. Both on the academic, both were, oh, by the way, both were academic reviewers for Pearson, and I hope we get into this a little later, but Bill and I were directly involved in picking the latest textbook for Florida. And during one of our phone calls with Pearson, we, remember this?
You sure do.
We were informed, neither one of us knew, that Shabir Mansouri and Susan Douglas were no longer part of their editorial staff. Now, Bill and I were not in the same room at the time. It was a conference call, but it was all I could do not to sound like a child now. I would go, really? Wow, that's great. It was at that point that I really believed we were making some headway.
So we've made some headway, and you both have to be congratulated because you were able to actually work with Pearson and edit some of the textbooks and have some impact on the outcome of some of those editions of Pearson published textbooks. However, I know that you probably both have seen in your research that Pearson's stock shareholders are an interesting bunch. Do you want to talk about that, Dr. Saxton?
Well, only to say that there are some dots that can be connected between other Arab nations and the financing issues involved with Pearson. I'm not at liberty really to get into that, except to say that there had been some opportunity for Pearson to take advantage of revenues from oil and other income producers for those nations, and they have an influence, but it's now become a waning influence. It's on the wane, I believe. It actually all began when a textbook was about to be purchased in Florida, and the book had serious flaws in it, and so we were invited to testify before the school board in Palm Beach County, Florida, which is the 11th largest school district in the country, big buyers of textbooks.
So the content that you found in the textbook was, can you give us some examples of what you found were problematic?
Well, I can't from memory think of all of them, but they were along the lines of, portraying Muhammad as the real deliverer of God's will and God's revelations.
Let me help you out for just a second, Bill. Some of the quotes, because when I make presentations, I use some of the quotes, so some of them are still with me. Right. They will talk about Christianity being a belief, Judaism being a story, but Islam, Muhammad received the revealed word of God and wrote it in the Quran. There is a passage about Jesus being a young Jewish boy born in Bethlehem, which is a town in Palestine. So that makes Jesus a Palestinian, which, by the way, that idea, that concept of Jesus being a Palestinian was used by Mahmoud Abbas in his 2014 Christmas speech to Christians, calling Jesus the Palestinian messenger of love. And then there's always one of my favorites. This was in a Houghton Mifflin book, Patterns of Interaction, which is one of the worst texts out there, which is a whole paragraph, but it ends with Islam being the only hope for peace and equality in this world. And that is those are some of the things we're teaching our children. That is the cultural jihad we're confronted with.
I'm sure we didn't have anything about the Barbary pirates in that textbook.
No, we did not have anything.
Because that wouldn't fit that narrative.
So anyway, getting back to the origins of the Pearson in World History textbook, which it was the flagship textbook on world history, they had made the point, or we had made the point to the school board that there was an issue there with the teaching of Islam. And I personally testified before the school board, and as a result of that, they decided they wanted that book reprinted, or they wouldn't buy it. Now, Florida is the third largest purchaser of textbooks in the country, and Palm Beach County is the 11th largest school district in the country. So it was very important that Pearson satisfy Palm Beach County. So they actually reprinted the textbook with the corrections made as we had suggested, and then that textbook was ultimately purchased. So Pearson learned a lesson. The lesson was, you better not put that kind of content in the textbook again, or you'll have a repeat of what happened in Florida. So what we're going to do this time, the next adoption cycle, which was going to be like 5 years from then, we better get with Citizens for National Security and get on the same wavelength. And what do you say? We'll work with Citizens for National Security, and we with them, and we will actually draft the content that was satisfactory to all. And Gary and I played a very prominent role in the drafting of the text, the content, for the book that is now being used, that it was now bought this time around. So we think we had, and in that process, amongst the other things we accomplished, Gary mentioned, we undid the influence of the Council on Islamic Education and IRCV and Shabir Mansouri and his colleagues, and they were gone. That was part of the deal. They had to be gone, or there wouldn't be a second purchase of the textbook 5 years later, and that's exactly what happened. So we began to see progress being made. And then other school districts in Florida taking note of that, because Palm Beach County is such a leader. Brevard County, for example, Miami-Dade County, which is one of the largest in the country. I think they're about third largest in the country now, as a school district. They took note of that, and they began, even on their own, reviewing their own books and eliminating some of them from their approved list.
Yeah, I remember reading about Miami-Dade telling Pearson, take your textbooks, in Palm Beach also. So did you find when you were working with Pearson to make these changes, was Pearson changing all the textbooks across the board or only the ones specific to the state of Florida?
No, well, the World History textbook is a book used across the country. Right. It's a national flagship textbook on world history. So we addressed only the content of that book. But I must say, they worked with us, they were cooperative, they accepted most of our recommendations. The book isn't perfect, but it's as close to being objective, let's say, as we could possibly want as a practical matter.
You were asking me about the influence of the school books and how we as parents influence our children. Actually, we are teaching our children, just as they in Syria and Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan and so forth, they teach their children, but they teach their children that they were put on this planet to create a global caliphate under Sharia law for the glory of Allah. And unfortunately, we teach our children too, and we teach our children in two ways. We teach them as role models, as examples of things that we tolerate. We unfortunately teach them contempt for the American Judeo-Christian tradition. We teach them, or they watch us, tolerate kneeling by role models in front of flags and during the anthem. They watch us as we allow the flag to be called, displaying the flag to be called offensive. They watch us as we tear down monuments to our history instead of learning from them. I don't care whether you agree or disagree with the monuments, but they're part of our history, part of our tradition. And instead of learning from them, they watch us as we tear them down. What message does that send to them? And by the way, someone has yet to explain to me why I have to, if I call my bank, or if I call my pharmacy or my insurance company, why do I have to press 1 for English? What kind of example are we setting for them? The other part is what we directly allow in schools. What are we allowing our teachers and our textbooks to teach them? As I mentioned before, we teach them that Christianity and Judaism are stories or nonsense, but Islam is the way. The bottom line is that we teach them that Islam is the way. And then what do? We let them go home, and what do? They watch Black Lives Matter that call for violence. They listen to rap music, which is just violence set to poetry. And then what do? They go play with their video games. Have you ever seen some of these video games? There's nothing more than violence on iPads. So what have we taught them? We taught them that we tolerate the denigration of the American and Judeo-Christian tradition. We teach them that Islam is the way and violence is the solution. And somehow we're shocked when there's a San Bernardino or a Little Rock or Chattanooga or New York or Boston. Why are we shocked? When we teach them contempt and they teach their children that Islam is the way and they have a divine mission on earth for Allah. What do you expect is going to happen?
Absolutely. And you have to believe, you have to talk to these kids and see that they accept whatever is in a book, a textbook, or whatever their teachers tell them. That's, in their minds, that's the ultimate source of information, correct information, valid information that they then take out. So they are extremely vulnerable. And by the way, once you get done penetrating them at the K-12 level, what happens to those kids in addition to going home and talking to the others? They go to college. And now the college campuses can't wait to have them in their classrooms so that they can perpetuate this lie, this bias, this misinformation. And A huge percentage of college professors are very pro-Islam. They promote Islam. Some of the leading schools in the country, schools like Georgetown, for example, and Harvard, perpetuate this thinking. And now they've got these kids whose minds have already been prepared for hearing yet more reinforcement, more information. So now you got the kids at the college level. So the problem of this phenomenon on campuses, it's a natural follow-up from K to 12. And that's why we looked at K to 12. We wanted to get at the kids before they get to college and make sure that they go into college with an open mind. And that wasn't happening.
I had an interesting conversation with a college student over here at Florida Atlantic University a couple of weeks ago. And I was very impressed with the caliber of the students who came to see our documentary on the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel. And following the film, we had some Q&A, and the responses from the students shocked me. I expected some maybe more liberal-leaning thoughts communicated back to me. And so I was prepared, but these students were not communicating that. In fact, these kids were communicating the narrative that we would communicate about that conflict. And I asked the students, how did this happen? You don't represent the majority of what we see on our college campuses, very liberal-leaning, progressive students with a progressive line. And one of the girls said to me, she said, I attribute it, and this was a junior at FAU, I attribute it to my upbringing, my parents. She said, not that my parents kept my interests the whole way. She said, when I was a freshman in college and I came into this campus, I wanted to fit in. And so she said, yes, I started, becoming more liberal in my views that were contrary to what I had been raised. But she said over time, she saw that the very people who espoused to be progressives were not really progressive at all. And she said, and that's why she swung back. She realized that what she had been instilled with, what she had been taught by her families, the role model that her parents lived before her, finally came back, and she realized, you know what, my parents were right. This isn't true, what they say. And so it was encouraging to see that there are students, college students out there that are truly seeking the truth. But you both bring up a very important issue, and that is how pervasive the problem is in our school system, on our college campuses, higher ed campuses. One of the reasons why we've targeted the high schools, secondary schools, is because just as they know, 12-year-olds, that 12, 13-year-old student, that's a very important, pivotal, transitional year for children. And that's where they really start the indoctrination. Now, I have had parents who've told me that they have a third grader. They in fact sent me a copy of a spelling test for a third grade class. And one of the words on the spelling test was shahada. This is in the belt buckle of the Bible Belt in a Williamson County school. So we see the problem. We know the problem and the issue, and it is pervasive because it is in the content of our children's textbooks. How do we solve this problem?
Well, Citizens for National, so do you have that list with you, Bill, of what to do? Remember you have the...
Yes, I don't have it with me, but I
We can encourage everyone to visit the website.
Yes. It is on the web.
Okay.
Bill had written something like 12 or 13 different things you can do. But basically, it is parental involvement. Parents don't realize the influence they have over their children. Parents have to get involved with teachers and school boards. And I tell you, one of the experiences I had, Bill mentioned that you mentioned that we spoke before the Palm Beach County School Board. And when I was speaking to them, I was pointing out some of the problems with some of the textbooks and so forth. And I said, one of the things that they didn't contradict me on was, please explain to me why Jesus was a Palestinian. Here it is, it's in writing. This is what the book says. And what I'd like you to do is just FaceTime me. When some irate parent comes into your classroom, dragging her poor child who's humiliated, wanting to know why you are teaching that her Lord and Savior was a Palestinian. Could you FaceTime me? I just want to listen. I won't say a word. Parents don't realize how much impact they can have. Talk to your congressman. I know there have been several protests and parental involvement in Newton recently. And I know you're involved, Bill is involved, deeply involved, you two are very deeply involved in that. And there's a huge problem there, but I understand that some headway is being made. And it's not only due to your efforts, but the involvement of parents. And they really have to get involved. Have meetings, join organizations. We both have organizations that are doing the legwork, exposing the lies, exposing the liars. And without involvement, without exposure, this is going to continue.
Right. You know, I think you bring up a good point, Gary. Our generation of parents, unfortunately, have bought into the lie that we don't want to push our children. We want them to be free thinkers. We want them to come to their own conclusions. But unfortunately, what we've missed in all of that is we haven't set boundaries. It's good to allow our children to try to think through the process, to think critically, but we have to give them boundaries. We have to give them information in order to make that determination. And we hear that all the time from educators. Well, we want our children to think critically. Of course, when I was in Newton and I was talking on a talk show host about the content that the kids were learning from, and I said, but the content is inaccurate. Well, that's okay, because we want our kids to be able to think critically. If it's not accurate, we want our kids to be able to think critically enough to know that it's not accurate. I said, how can these kids know that it's not accurate if they're not given the opposing viewpoint? One of the things that drives me crazy right now is the fact that we're losing our constitutional republic, and our children, that generation, doesn't even know what rights are being taken from them. They don't read the Declaration of Independence. They don't know what their Bill of Rights are or is. They don't know what the Constitution says. They don't read it. They don't teach the kids how to write in longhand anymore. So how could they even read our founding documents to know? It almost reminds me of a biblical story where King Hezekiah, as the rabbis and the leaders, the priests, were going through the rubble of Jerusalem, and they came upon a Torah scroll, and they started reading it out loud, and Hezekiah rent his garment, because they knew that they weren't following Torah. How many generations had gone by? I see a very similar thing happening to the United States of America. Our history is being rent out of our schools.
Laurie, I have spoken to congressmen who have children in the K-12 public school system who are absolutely mind blown when I show them what's in these textbooks. And in some cases, I know that they don't even believe it. But I actually show it to them. I show them the textbooks. They had no idea. And think about it. How many parents look at their children's textbooks, see what they're reading, see what they're being taught in class? I have to admit that I didn't, and neither do most parents that I know. Only when it comes to light, that maybe then they take an interest. I think we have to get the word out broadly. We have to use social media, if necessary, to get it out there. I see on a regular basis school districts like the one in Newton, the one that is basically indoctrinating their kids with misinformation because they're accepting the bias and they're not doing anything about it. I have people calling me from all over the country asking, what can we do? Can you help us? The problem is, by the time they get to us, they have so alienated the school districts and the school committee people that they're persona non grata. And now, so I've got a stage 4 terminal case here that I'm having to resurrect, and it's not easy. You know, I wish they had come to me at the beginning, because one thing that happens when you confront school committees with these concerns, they get defensive. And you need to deal with them in an academic, constructive environment. Have conversations before you attack them. and attacking right from the get-go. Now you've got an enemy in the school committee rather than a friend. But in cases where we have gotten to the school committees before we got to the point where they have to circle the wagons, they have been at least willing to listen and somewhat cooperative in some cases. But there are school districts all over the country who are doing the same thing that they're doing in Newton. They have superintendents that should be fired. They have school committee men and women who should be replaced. And they're trying to protect their positions. They're high-paying jobs in some cases. Superintendent in Newton, for example, gets well over $300,000. So he doesn't, and by the way, that's a superintendent who was found guilty of plagiarism several months ago, and they couldn't get rid of him on that one. So that's what you're facing in trying to deal with these structures. But the more the word gets out there, and the more the Newtons become national news, the more I think you're going to see school districts becoming at least a little bit more communicative and maybe sympathetic to the issues that we're raising.
And I don't think you can underestimate the impact that, I mean, we're talking about a 13 or 14-year-old child. Put yourself in that child's position. He has two authority figures, his parents and school. His parents teach him by example. They cannot tell him what to think because he'll just rebel. We are all parents, we know that. If you want me to see this, you want me to think this, no chance. Okay, when I was 16, I called my father a capitalist pig. Okay? You know, how dare you provide a home for me and a car and camps and all the rest of that stuff.
Because of that capitalism.
That's right, that's right. But he was a capitalist pig. I was socialist at the time. Anyway, so we have a child that's being influenced by his parents. Then he goes to school and he's taught that American Judeo-Christian tradition is popular these days to denigrate it. You know, the flag and the tradition and the monuments, it's useless. So he's looking for another answer. And we are teaching him that Islam is the answer. And right now in Parkland, there was this whole thing with the AR-15s, AK-14s, and AR-15s.
Right.
I knew it was there. AR-15s, and we're going to ban guns. And is it about guns? Probably. Is it about mental health? Probably. But we are leading them in that direction by serving as examples and allowing Islam to be the way and violence to be the solution. It is all part of whatever the answer is ultimately going to be. We cannot ignore what these children are learning in schools and learning from us as parents as role models.
Well, they're watching it on the news. They're watching the debate being framed in that respect, that it's the guns, instead of framing the debate on making sure our schools are safe, reminding students that, you know, we have gun rights in this country to protect us from tyrannical governments, but we don't teach those things. That discussion doesn't come into the narrative. That's not the foundation anymore. When I went to school, and I graduated from Broward County Schools, I think I was the last graduating class in 1980 to come out being a patriot, because it was after that, and as I've done my research, it was about 1986 when we started to see this new, the influence of Islam starting to slowly start to permeate our textbooks. Now, today, because one of the areas we focus on is anti-Semitism, there is a lack of teaching the history of anti-Semitism anymore. Now, where we used to spend a week with field trips and movies and all different types of guest speakers coming to talk to us about, of course, now our Holocaust survivors are beginning to pass away, but we don't teach. We maybe have a paragraph that we talk about that incident in history. We don't talk about it from the perspective of a fascist Nazi, you know, government that came to power who, you know, was anti-Semitic. We don't compare that with our constitutional republic and how we protect the freedoms and people of all faiths and races are able to live here. No, you're right. We teach our children that America is bad, that the monuments, the horrible parts of our history, I said that when they were tearing down the monuments myself, that, you know, whether it was a good part of our history or a bad part of our history, it's a part of our history that we can utilize to teach our children. Use it as a teaching opportunity to talk about who we were back then as a culture compared to who we are today. And so,
you know, there are thousands and thousands and thousands, I don't know how many textbooks are still out there as we speak that have this biased information in them. It's anti-Christianity, anti-Judaism, anti-Israel, pro-Islam out there. Kids are still getting it. Those books still have to be removed. Some states, like for example California, they haven't bought a new textbook since 2005 because they don't have the money in the budget to do it. So they're using old textbooks. They're still out there. California, all the kids in California are getting this stuff. So how is their education being updated? By organizations like the Council on American Islamic Relations CARE, being out there and trying to find their way into the classroom so that they can address the students directly, person to person. And as a matter of fact, a very interesting tactic has emerged in recent days in California that is being piloted, basically test run, by the Council on American Islamic Relations, whereby using bullying as a camouflage excuse for getting into the classrooms, speaking to the kids directly in the classrooms. They're doing an end run around the campaign that we lodged out there on the textbooks. And they know we've got them on the textbooks as a straightforward issue. So they have to find a new way to get in.
Right. So are you talking about the San Diego Unified School District situation where the judge came in and ruled and struck some of the verbiage in the lawsuit that the parents filed?
That is correct.
Okay.
And by the way, I'm dealing with another school district out there, Ramona, California School District. They have they're a very similar problem. They're about maybe a year behind the San Diego Unified School District. They've got the same problem out there. And no doubt there are other school districts in California suffering from the same deficiency. We haven't heard about them yet, but sooner or later, I'm sure I'm going to get another call from yet another school district in California. Well, what can we do like they did in Ramona and San Diego? But that San Diego case is really crucial because the head of the CARE organization in Southern California has actually stated, I have his words, that if this is successful in California, in San Diego, we're going to use it in other school districts across the country. And it's already beginning to emerge in places like Philadelphia, right, Sacramento, and no doubt other cities that I don't yet know about. Right. So this is a purposeful attempt, again, just to get the kids, because you think when the CARE director in San Diego gets these kids in this classroom, he's only going to talk about bullying. I mean, other kids are being bullied out there too, ostensibly. In fact, they found out that Muslims were being bullied far less out there than Jews.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
Let's make it clear that these tactics are in the form of Islam tolerance classes. Right. Just because he's a Muslim doesn't mean he's worthy of being bullied. And what CARE and other lobby groups are fostering are these classes, and they're running them by the school boards. I'm somewhat familiar with the thing in Philadelphia. I have some friends in Philadelphia, and I made them aware of this, and they were absolutely outraged, and we're trying to follow up on that now.
Well, they're playing to that fear of educators and school board members that there must be Islamophobe out there in the United States of America, when in recent studies, even the ADL recently came out with a study that in 2017 here in the United States of America, of all places, the Judeo-Christian nation, where we see an almost 70% increase in anti-Semitic incidents. However, when compared to the FBI report that came out that stated that that Muslim persecution is way down on the scale and anti-Semitism is way up. So we show FBI reports, we see the ADL report stating this, but we don't have, we're minimizing the Holocaust. We're not talking about anti-Semitism in our classrooms. We're not teaching our kids about that. What is it, as we wrap up this interview, What do we do? Where do we go from here? Dr. Saxton.
Well, I know what we're going to continue to do as Citizens for National Security. Our job, our role, is to make all this information we've been talking about available to as broad an audience as we can find nationwide. We're out there all the time. We have a Facebook page. Matter of fact, very interesting, we have about 150,000 loyal followers and building on our Facebook page, and these people are hugely interested in this issue. Now, I'm not saying that every Facebook fan of ours is going to go out and do something about it, but again, it's a numbers game. So when we
Facebook hasn't shut you down yet? They keep blocking me. Every time I put something out, boom, they shut it down.
Well, we try to disguise it the best we can. Although the information that we put out there, most of it is available, open source. You can get it off the internet if you really want to spend the time and the effort that we do to collect it. But whenever we put a posting out there on a school issue, for example, the Newton issue, the reach to our followers, the people of our 150,000 who actually have opened one of our postings on a given day, the reach on the textbook issues that we put out there far exceed any other subject that we post.
Interesting.
And that says a lot.
So it shows, yeah. People are upset.
There are people out there concerned about what we're talking about. So again, the numbers, and we've got the force multiply. It's going to be a combination of things, but a lot of it has to do with social media. And getting the information and making it credible. We maintain a very high degree of credibility as an organization, I'm proud to say. It's because we look at the information very critically. My background in particular, being involved in the intelligence arena, we were taught, you need to have 3 independent confirming sources to believe that a story might be true. I'm willing to accept 1. Now, if we're that one that can put the information out to the rest of the country, I think we have a high degree of success in getting people to believe what we're saying. Now, getting them to do something about it, that's always very hard. People don't want to get involved, particularly parents with kids in the school system. They're concerned, and it has actually happened, that when they go out there and make an issue of the type we're talking about, their kids pay the price for it. And it's happening a lot on college campuses as well, the same phenomenon. The professors in colleges do the same thing that some of the teachers in high school do. They take it out on the kids. So instead of getting an A when you deserved it, you get a C- or a D+. That's not fair, but that's the way they're fighting back. And that is absolutely unacceptable.
Dr. Numan.
Well, as someone who was guilty of not being involved, that I had it thrown in my face in 2005 by my well-educated, or someone I thought was well-educated daughter, I can only say that my generation of parents, we are failing our children. We are failing our children by serving as poor role models, by not getting involved in their education.
And our grandchildren.
And our grandchildren. I have a grandson now, and I am scared to death. And I am encouraging my daughter right now to really get involved in his education. She is really. But it's involvement and exposure of what's going on. I have found that once parents are aware of what their children are learning, they get angry and they get involved. We cannot afford the luxury of failing our children. And the last thing is, there are people, organizations such as yours and ours and a few others that are doing that job of exposing the lies and the liars, and that has to be continued. And I would urge anybody to fund our organizations, join our organizations. We need all the help we can get.
Well, again, we can go.
May I have a concluding word, though? Can I conclude with a statement, a quote?
Absolutely.
From Abraham Hooper. Abraham Hooper was National Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, and in the Minnesota Star Tribune, back in the late 90s, he made the following statement. I wouldn't want to create the impression that I wouldn't like the government of the U.S. to be Islamic at some time in the future. but I'm not going to do anything violent to promote that. I'm going to use education, unquote.
And I'd like to end with a quote too. Perhaps not as profound as Abraham Hooper, but this is a good quote. This is what involvement is all about. This is from Margaret Mead, perhaps the foremost archaeologist, sociologist of the 20th century. She said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has."
Amen. And I'm gonna finalize that thought with a quote from the Bible in Joel chapter 1, verse 3. When God told the prophet, "You are to teach these truths, the Torah, to your children and to your children's children throughout their generations." Ladies and gentlemen, our government, our form of government was based on the Torah of Moses. And it's all throughout the book of Leviticus. And you can study it and read it for yourselves. But we've not done a very good job, but now's the time. Now, as we as parents and citizens of this great country have a responsibility biblically to defend our land, the land that God has given us, and to defend those Judeo-Christian values that made our country great. I want to thank you for joining us again today at Proclaiming Justice today. You can visit our website at pjtn.org. We'll have more information. And of course, the Citizens for National Security.us. Pay them a visit as well. Join their team, get informed, get educated, share this information with your family and friends. It's going to be we the people that take back our government. God bless you, and thank you for tuning in to Proclaiming Justice today.